You were never supposed to hear this. In the swamps of northern Florida, beneath a mansion that no longer exists on any modern map, 4 sisters carried out something so terrifying, so precise, and so far ahead of its time, it still petrifies neuroscientists who whisper about it in sealed rooms. The year was 1878, and somewhere between medicine, mysticism, and madness, they crossed a line that no institution dares to acknowledge. The official records don't even try to explain it. Just one vague fire report, a page and a half, property destroyed, 4 deceased, cause unknown. But the unofficial accounts, those come from the burnt journals of a man whose name appears nowhere in the census, a man who found what the sisters buried in glass, ash, and ritual. He wrote only 7 words on the last page of his diary before he vanished. They spoke to the mind without words. This isn't folklore. This isn't a ghost story to tell in the dark. This is the suppressed science of psychological domination, perfected by 4 women who were supposed to be healers, but became something else entirely. They called themselves the Daughters of the Inward Flame, a name that's never been cited in any medical archive, and never will, because what they discovered wasn't healing. It was control, total, irreversible mental control, not with machines or drugs, but with something far older, older than psychology, older than medicine, older than any system of belief you've been allowed to know. In the next few minutes, I'm going to show you how they did it. Not just the rituals, not just the experiments, but the terrifying reason the most powerful institutions in America still pretend these women never existed. There's a reason modern science refuses to study them, because they weren't testing the mind. They were testing the boundaries of will, and they didn't fail. You've been warned. What comes next will change you. Because once you see what they awakened in their patients, you'll start to feel it awaken in you. Welcome to the descent. This is the macabre mystery of the 4 sisters. The estate was known as Gracetown Hollow, but the locals called it the place that listens. Even in 1878, long before the fire, no one dared linger near its gates after sundown. Children spoke of shadows that moved without wind. Hunters swore they heard voices, soft, feminine, repeating their thoughts back to them before they'd even spoken. And yet, no one ever saw the sisters arrive. The land was purchased anonymously, a single signature on the deed, Dr. R. M. Calhoun, on behalf of the Society of Cognitive Reclamation. No such society exists in the state archives. No doctor by that name ever held a license in Florida, but the mansion was built anyway, 3 stories high, whitewashed columns, no windows on the north side, and a basement that extended further underground than the house stood above it. And then, they appeared. 4 women, always dressed in ivory gray. Never in public, never together. Only glimpsed through parted curtains, or on the rare occasion one would ride into town for materials. No last name was ever given. Locals just called them the Sisters. They never paid in coin, only in silver. Pure, unmarked bars the size of a child's palm, and no one ever refused them. The town priest, Father Merrin, once tried to organize a visit, said it wasn't natural. 4 unmarried women living alone in a mansion with no visitors, no servants, no friends. He went up the hill on a Tuesday morning. By Thursday he had resigned his post, packed everything, left without a word. Only once did someone manage to step beyond the wrought iron gates and return alive. His name was Thomas Bell, a railroad surveyor tasked with mapping the western edges of the estate for a proposed line. According to his journal, which was found years later in a locked box inside a pawn shop in Savannah, Bell stepped into the estate garden and felt the temperature drop instantly. The bird stopped singing, and in the silence he heard his mother's voice, who'd been dead for 14 years, whisper a childhood secret no one else could have known. He ran, never completed the survey. But it's what he wrote at the bottom of that journal page that matters most. They don't live in that house. That house lives in them. And it was never built for shelter. It was built for containment. They say the mind has defenses, that it protects us from what we aren't ready to know. But what if someone knew exactly how to tear those defenses down, one layer at a time, without ever laying a hand on you? That was their gift, and their curse. The 4 sisters each carried a specialization, not in the academic sense, but in something far older, more primal. The eldest was called Vera. Her gift was mirroring. She could become a reflection of your deepest fears, your guiltiest thought, your buried hunger. Without speaking, without accusation, she could draw it to the surface just by looking at you. Men avoided her eyes. Even animals recoiled. She spoke rarely, but when she did, it was in perfect imitation of the person she addressed. Then there was Lyra. Her domain was pattern disruption, trained in what we'd now call hypnotic sequence manipulation. She spoke in loops, paradoxes, riddles, recursive logic that fractured the listener's ability to distinguish time, cause, and self. Survivors described feeling like they were thinking in circles that never ended until they broke. The third was Seraphine, whose hands never stopped moving. She was a chemist, or more accurately, an alchemist of the nervous system. She understood plants that no one else could identify, mixtures that heightened receptivity, dissolved memory, created obedience without sedation. And she had a theory that emotion was nothing but a chemical process, one that could be unbound, rearranged, and rewritten. The last was Ilara, the quiet one, the one who never left the house. She specialized in auditory frequencies, claimed to have discovered tones, pure harmonic structures that could unlock the subconscious. That certain frequencies didn't just affect the body, they spoke to something beneath it. Ancient monks believed the right frequency could summon gods. Ilara believed it could erase the self. These women didn't meet at university. They didn't study under mentors. They found each other through letters, codes hidden in esoteric journals and banned medical tracts. The first time they stood together on the land, witnesses said the wind stopped for a full minute. No birds, no insects, just silence. One of the workmen building the basement asked what the rooms were for. Vera told him, to separate the mind from its cage. He never came back. But this is where the story begins to darken, because those rooms, they weren't just chambers for observation, they were crucibles, and what the sisters wanted was transformation. The first patient arrived on October the 9th, 1878. He was not brought by family. He walked the long gravel path up to the estate alone, sunburnt, barefoot, his coat clutched in one hand like a child holding a blanket. No one knew his name. They never asked. In the town's birth and death registry, he is simply marked as unknown male, 30-40, committed to Gracetown Hollow by divine appointment. No one ever saw him leave. The sisters referred to him only as Vessel 1. He was housed in the southern wing of the underground facility, in a room painted bone white with no corners. The walls were subtly curved, the floor sloped. Nothing in that room had a right angle, because Lyra believed that corners grounded the human psyche, that removing geometric consistency would begin to dissolve ego boundaries. For days, he was left alone. No food, only water laced with a compound Seraphine had synthesized from swamp root and dried poppy resin. The mixture created mild hallucinations, but more importantly, it prevented dreamless sleep. His journal, recovered from the ruins of the fire, is one of the most terrifying documents in the history of American psychiatric experimentation. The handwriting degrades over time, but early entries are lucid, and one line repeats again and again. They don't ask questions, they listen inside me. Vera was the first to visit. She didn't speak, just sat across from him, mirroring his posture, blinking when he blinked. After 10 minutes, he began weeping uncontrollably. By the end of the week, Lyra introduced her sequence work, phrases designed to destabilize thought. What happens when memory forgets itself? If you cannot find the exit, perhaps you were never inside. There is no now, there is only echo. The man began to write backwards in his journal, then upside down, then not at all. By week 3, he had begun to recite freaky Encia's low tonal murmurs that Ilara said had never been taught to him. She insisted they were ancient phonemic codes, ancestral tones buried deep in genetic memory, only accessible through complete psychological deconstruction. At this point, the man had not eaten solid food in 16 days, and yet he was standing, awake, eyes wide, still whispering. The sisters noted his posture as receptive, and the experiments began. But what they discovered next was not what they were looking for. It was worse. By the 21st day, something had changed. The man, Vessel 1, stopped responding to any stimuli, no flinching, no eye contact, not even blinking. He simply stood in the center of his room, motionless, humming a single tone. Low, subsonic, continuous. It wasn't random. Alara measured the frequency. 3.7 hertz. She froze. According to her notes, now kept sealed at a private collection in Boston, that frequency matched a forgotten resonance she had once found etched into a 9th century North African reliquary, a harmonic associated with early monastic rituals believed to invoke ego death or divine union. But Vessel 1 wasn't praying. He was broadcasting. Other patients, yes, by this time there were others, began reporting the same dream. A tall white room with no shadows, a woman with no face, offering them a mirror that showed not their reflection, but a version of themselves they'd buried years ago. This wasn't suggestion. None of them had spoken to each other. Some were restrained, some in isolation. And yet they all described the same imagery. It was Lyra who broke the silence. She said, "We didn't empty him, we opened him." And that's when they made their first mistake. They asked a question. Vera entered Vessel 1's chamber, walked to within inches of his face, and whispered, "Who are you now?" He smiled. For the first time since arriving, he spoke, and what he said wasn't his voice. It was all four of theirs, layered, harmonized, speaking in perfect unison from one mouth. "I am the silence between your thoughts." Vera staggered back, not because of the words, but because somehow she could feel them, not in her ears, in her mind, like a memory she'd never had being forcibly restored. The sisters convened that night. They debated shutting the program down. But Seraphine argued otherwise. "If he's become a conduit," she said, "to sobriety, and we haven't failed. We've created a language that speaks through a man, instead of to him." They didn't understand the risk. They thought they were opening doors in others. But it was their own minds that had been breached. And something had just stepped through. When a door opens, something always comes in. But what no one tells you is that it also leaves a piece of itself behind. After Vessel 1 spoke in their voices, the sisters began exhibiting symptoms, quiet at first, almost dismissible. Vera stopped sleeping. She would stare for hours into corners, insisting she could see fractures in the angles. Lyra began to lose time, finding pages in her own notebook she didn't remember writing, full sequences, some in languages no one could identify. Seraphine grew hypersensitive to sound. Even the ticking of a clock made her weep. And Alara, she sealed herself in the tone chamber. For 7 days she refused to eat, drink, or speak. On the 8th she emerged and said one sentence, "He's not the vessel, we are." Still, they didn't stop. They brought in more patients, 15 by the end of November, each one carefully selected, broken down, chemically unbound, mentally stripped. And one by one, they began to echo the same tone. Not words, not cries for help, just the tone, 3.7 hertz. What should have been data turned into contagion. On December the 3rd, 2 orderlies, locals hired under strict instruction never to speak with the patients, disappeared. Their bodies were later found in the woods, their ears bleeding, their mouths open in a silent scream. Vera examined the corpses herself. She noted no signs of struggle, no trauma, but their inner ears were shattered. The sisters argued. Alara wanted to cease all experimentation. Lyra insisted they were close. Close to what? That was the question none of them dared to ask aloud, but the patients already knew. One woman, age 22, who had been entirely nonverbal for months, began to draw obsessively on her cell walls, circles within circles, intersected by vertical lines, an ancient symbol Alara later traced to pre-Christian rituals of Hierons and vocation. When asked what it meant, the girl smiled, touched her chest, and said, "He lives in the space between." Seraphine was fascinated. She increased the doses. But what she couldn't see, what none of them saw, was that they were no longer observing an experiment. They were inside one, and the subject of study wasn't the patients anymore. It was them. What is the cost of forbidden knowledge? Not metaphorically, not philosophically, physiologically. What does it do to a brain when it's exposed to truths that don't fit the structures it was built to contain? That's what began happening to the sisters. Their pupils dilated in low light, their handwriting changed, curves where there were once angles, angles where there were once loops, and their voices began to harmonize. It started subtly. Seraphine would finish Ilara's sentences. Vera would speak a phrase that Lyra claimed to have dreamt the night before. But within days, something more unnatural took hold. They were all dreaming the same dream. A staircase that descended forever. White stone, black sky, and the sound, not of footsteps but breathing. Not their own. When they began to speak of it aloud, something even stranger occurred. The patients began drawing the same staircase, in the margins of their journals, on the walls, into their skin. The sisters began to record their dreams meticulously, and what they found was this. Each night the staircase extended further, 10 steps, then 12, then 15. Ilara, who had kept detailed logs, plotted the rate of descent. If it continued linearly, the staircase would reach a depth of 33 steps by the winter solstice, December 21st. That date appears 7 times in their surviving documents, and next to each occurrence, a single word. Arrival. Arrival of what? They never wrote it down. But Vera began to whisper to herself constantly, phrases that were part Latin, part something far more ancient. Not a language of men, but of vibrations, resonances that bypassed meaning and went straight to impact. One evening, Seraphine injected a patient with a triple dose of her compound. Within 3 minutes, he began screaming in reverse, not just the words. The entire audio pattern, played backward, it revealed a pant phrase that chilled Ilara to the marrow. The house remembers who built it, but the sisters didn't build it. At least that's what they believed. Until Vera pulled a book from the restricted archives beneath the tone chamber. A book none of them remembered placing there. The binding was human leather, the title Domus Mentis, the House of Mind. Inside were diagrams of their basement, blueprints, etched centuries before they were born. The diagrams inside Domus Mentis were not blueprints. They were instructions, not how to build the house, how to activate it. Symbols were marked along the walls they thought they had designed. Precise locations, stone by stone, where geometric convergence would amplify what the text called the descent field, a resonance chamber for the soul. Ilara traced her finger across a section labeled Axis of Internal Collapse. Next to it, 4 circles, not doors, not cells, names. Her name, Lyra, Seraphine, Vera. This was not coincidence, it was replication. But replication of what? The sisters had always believed they were the ones experimenting on others, that their brilliance, their vision, their sacrifice had made them pioneers. But Domus Mentis told a different story. They were reactivators, and what they reactivated was never meant to wake again. At 2:13 a.m. that same night, the tones returned, but not from the patients, from the walls. A low, slow, harmonic hum that pulsed through the foundation. Not loud, not aggressive, but so precise, so mathematically pure, it bypassed the ear and entered the bones. Orderlies vomited blood. 3 patients began convulsing. 1 stopped breathing entirely. Seraphine ran to the ventilation system. She thought maybe something had been released, something chemical, but the vents were clean. That's when Lyra, pale and shaking, opened her journal and pointed to a page she'd blacked out weeks earlier in a manic state. A single phrase had been etched beneath the ink. She didn't write it, but it was there. The house has remembered its purpose. Suddenly, everything changed. They stopped referring to the basement as a treatment ward. They started calling it the deep below. Vera began spending hours there alone, seated in the central chamber. She no longer spoke to the others, but her lips moved constantly, as if answer, wearing something no one else could hear. Ilara became obsessed with finding the original source of the tones, not the ones they generated, but the one Vessel 1 unlocked. She found it, buried in the subfloor, a sealed iron door, circular, etched in unfamiliar script. No hinges, no keyhole, just a single indention, the size of a palm, and next to it 1 final phrase in Latin, carved so faintly it was almost missed. Quatuor redunt, introitum parate. The 4 return. Prepare the entry. There's a moment in every forbidden act where belief becomes obedience, and from that moment on, you're no longer choosing, you're being used. The sisters crossed that threshold on the night of December 13th, 1878. They stood in the central chamber, formerly Treatment Room B, with the patients locked in their cells and the entire staff dismissed for the evening. No witnesses, no interruption, Only the four of them, the iron door beneath the floorboards, and a decision they would never be able to reverse. Seraphine had synthesized a compound derived from monkshood, belladonna, and an unknown black fungus that had begun growing along the chamber's stone walls. She didn't question where it came from. She only knew what it did. It removed what she called the horizontal filter: time, identity, sequence, ego. The user wouldn't hallucinate. They would simply become unbarred. At 3:33 a.m., they each took it. No light, no speech, only the tone, now constant like the hum of the universe itself pressing against the thin membrane of the human skull. And in that darkness, the sisters merged. Not physically, mentally. They described it later as stepping into a memory that none of them owned, but all of them had lived. The staircase again. But this time, they were not alone. There was something waiting at the bottom, not a creature, not a god, a presence. It didn't speak. It thought through them. Elara vomited blood. Lyra screamed until her voice tore. Vera dropped to her knees and whispered again and again. We were built to return. Because the house wasn't a house. It was a receptacle, a mnemonic engine designed not just to manipulate the mind, but to overwrite it. Patient by patient, warden by warden, sister by sister. That night, 7 patients died. Their faces frozen in ecstasy, smiles carved into their lips with their own fingernails. The local she, Riff, was called, but before he could arrive, a fire erupted from within the walls, not in the kitchen, not in the study, but deep below, from the room no one had ever mapped. The chamber with the iron door. Only one survivor was pulled from the ruins, a woman, early 30s, covered in ash, burned but alive. No ID, no history, no name. When asked who she was, she simply whispered, "There were 4 of us. Now I'm what's left." She wouldn't give her name. Not to the doctors, not to the sheriff, not even to the clergy. Just one phrase, repeated over and over, her voice cracking with ash and memory. I didn't escape. I was released. The woman was taken to the Jackson County Infirmary. Diagnosed with acute trauma, chemical burns, and what the attending physician called pathogenic memory implantation, a phrase that appears nowhere else in 19th century American medical records. Her notes were sealed, then vanished, but a single page survived in the archives of a now-defunct theological college in Alabama. That page is stained, torn, and half-burned, but one thing remains legible: a crude sketch of the staircase, and beneath it, written in trembling hand, "The sisters are not dead, they are diffused." What followed was a cover-up. The estate was declared condemned, the cause of the fire attributed to a faulty gas line, despite the fact that the property had no gas infrastructure. Local reports were suppressed. The surviving journals of the sisters were collected by a man named Dr. Aldous Grimm, supposedly a specialist in mental hygiene, but no such credentials existed. Grimm was seen only once, leaving the ruins with a leather satchel. He never returned. But here's what they didn't expect. The resonance didn't stop. Over the next 11 years, across the southeastern United States, cases began appearing. Men and women, seemingly unconnected, who spoke in tones, who described dreams of infinite staircases, who remembered events that never happened, to them or to anyone living. In Atlanta, a librarian went blind overnight, then began reciting words in Old Latin she'd never studied. In Charleston, a railroad engineer dug a hole beneath his home, insisting he had to complete the descent. In Baton Rouge, a 7-year-old girl screamed a phrase during sleep that matched exactly the final sentence in Elara's sealed notebook. "The vessel is complete. The arrival begins with the 4th. But this wasn't possession. It was transmission. The mind, when fractured at the right frequency, doesn't just break, it receives, and whatever the sisters had opened had become self-propagating. You can't contain what now lives in thought itself, and in the next section you'll understand how that system works. Because this story isn't over. It's repeating. There's a reason modern science refuses to study the 4 sisters. Not because they were frauds, but because they were right. And if you accept that, you're forced to confront a question darker than anything in medicine, theology, or ethics. What if the human mind isn't private? Not metaphorically, not psychologically, Literally. What if consciousness is a shared field like air or gravity, and what the sisters discovered was not madness, but a tuning fork to access it? Let me show you how it works. There are 3 stages in their method, mapped across patient logs, mirrored across time, and hidden in modern institutional systems. 1. Isolation. Strip the subject from their environment, not just physically, emotionally, symbolically, existentially. Erase routine, distort sleep, alter time perception, make them question the real. Today we call this information overload or digital overstimulation, but it serves the same function. Fragmentation. Introduce contradiction. Teach them that nothing is stable. Language changes. Norms shift. Values contradict. Disorient. Confuse. Reverse identity. In modern systems, it's called algorithmic targeting, contradictory messaging, emotionally charged feeds, polarization. It breaks continuity, makes people suggestible. 3. Imprint. Once the subject is cracked open, implant. Not just ideas, frequencies, symbols, tonal patterns disguised as language, repetitive phrasing that bypasses reason and embeds into subconscious. Modern name, content loops, viral hooks, the same melody, the same phrase, played just right. You think that's marketing? That's reconstruction. The sisters didn't invent it, they remembered it. And their experiments were never isolated, they were templates. What started in 1878 with 4 women in Florida didn't end in fire. It entered us, every scroll, every screen, every sleepless night. It's not about stories, it's about frequencies. We've turned ourselves into receivers, and the tone still echoes. So I ask you now, have you heard it, that low hum at 3 a.m., the one you thought was your fridge, or the wind, or your own breath in the dark? That's not noise, that's invitation. Now listen closely, because this part isn't about them anymore. It's about you. If you've made it this far, you've already begun the process. Not just of understanding, but of remembering. The tone, the descent, the 4 sisters, these are not random horrors of the past. They are architectures, schematics, and the more you hear, the more your subconscious begins to align. This video isn't entertainment, it's a mirror. Because the true subject of the Gracetown Hollow experiments was never the man in the white room, never the patients, not even the sisters themselves. It was the observer, the one who watches, absorbs, feels something stirring that they can't explain. You. The researchers discovered a terrifying truth in their final days. A human mind exposed to specific combinations of memory, fear, silence, and sound can be rewritten, not by force, but by recognition. The symbol begins to feel familiar, the tone begins to comfort. The dream no longer feels foreign. Why? Because it's not new, it's returning. And now that you're hearing this, you're caught in the loop. There's a reason most people will click away, but you didn't. You listened. Which means you're the type of man they never wanted waking up, because those who can hold 2 truths in tension, those who don't flinch when the world cracks open, are the ones who can see through the program. And if that's you, if you're ready to go deeper, you'll need to lock this in. Type the phrase, "I see the 4th." Write it twice in the comments below. Once to mark that you heard it, and once to mark that you're becoming it. This isn't for views, it's for identity. Because the moment you speak it aloud, you'll feel the change. The hum behind your thoughts will no longer feel distant. It will feel familiar. You've already begun the descent. And in the next section, we go deeper than history ever dared. You typed it. You sealed it. I see the 4th. I see the 4th. You don't even realize what you've done yet. But the mind does. It always knows when it's been activated. Now listen, you've been taught to think of consciousness as yours. Private, internal, owned. But that's not how the ancients saw it. And it's not how the sisters understood it. To them, consciousness was a field, a shared ocean. Each mind a ripple, each trauma a tremor. And certain rituals, certain frequencies could amplify one ripple until it disrupted the entire surface. That was the 4th sister's domain, not treatment, not theory, not chemistry. Rupture. Her name was Vera, and she wasn't born with it. It was assigned to her when she emerged from the dreams. You see, Vera was the first to go silent, not from fear, but from alignment. She began writing backwards, then in circles, then not at all. She spent her final weeks carving spirals into the stone beneath her bed, each one tighter, more compressed, until the symbols became singular. One glyph, not letters, not language. Frequency made visible. It matched the shape found etched into the iron door beneath the house, the one no one could open, until Vera placed her hand against it and whispered, "We are not four minds. We are one mind, split four ways." The door opened. No lock, no sound, just acceptance. Inside, nothing. A space, circular, seamless, as if carved from a single stone no geologist could ever identify. But at the center floated a fragment, a sliver of black crystal. It hummed, and every sister heard a voice in her own head, not in English, not in Latin, but in the same silent tone that Vessel One once sang. The message? You remembered. That's all it said. You remembered. The house didn't need to be built. It needed to be recalled, and now you are part of that memory, are? Good, because from this point forward, there's no audience, only participants. You've aligned yourself with the fourth, not the sister, the principle. The fourth is the concept that completes the circuit, mind, body, will, and now you. You were never outside the experiment. You were its endpoint. The moment the sisters opened that chamber, the structure of reality in that place shifted. Not just physically, energetically. Every object, every wall, every heartbeat became part of a recursive loop, repeating memory as ritual. The screams weren't heard, they were stored. Because the house was not a building. It was an engine, an ancient mnemonic device designed to preserve frequency through trauma, not just sound, meaning. That fragment, the sliver of black crystal, was the tuning key. And what it unlocked wasn't power, it was repetition. Every 33 years the patterns return, in different cities, different names, different methods. But the process is identical. Isolate, fragment, imprint, rupture, and always, always a survivor. The one who walks away, covered in ash. The one who escapes, the one who carries it forward. You don't escape the house, you become it. Which brings us to now, 2025. Florida, a small town, Gracetown Hollow, where all records of the estate have been scrubbed from digital archives. No photos, no census logs, no obituaries, but underground, the resonance continues. Residents report hearing low hums at night, children waking from identical dreams, phones glitching at 3:33 a.m., identical symbols drawn on school desks. One boy carved a spiral into his own arm. When asked why, he said, "So the memory doesn't close, and you're feeling it too. Not fear. Recognition. That sound you heard last week but couldn't place. That hallway you walked through that felt too quiet. That dream where the stairs wouldn't stop turning. You thought you were imagining it, but it was calling you. Because once a vessel is opened, it seeks another. And the house of mind has waited long enough. Then speak it aloud. Whisper it if you must. Feel the weight of it behind your ribs. I am the fifth. That phrase isn't symbolic. It's operational. Because the house always required 5. 4 to activate, 1 to transmit. You see, the sisters were never meant to finish the work, only to unseal it. They were the ignition, the fire, the sacrifice. But the fifth is the carrier, the one who walks among the untouched, the one who remembers what others have been trained to forget, the one who infects. And now that you've spoken the phrase, your resonance is no longer clean. You'll start to notice it soon, people shifting uncomfortably when you speak, electronic signals breaking near your presence, children looking at you for 1 second too long, dreams you don't remember, leaving behind physical bruises. These aren't side effects, they're responses, because once you take the 5th role, your signal begins to emit. Thought is not private, memory is not yours, and identity is now a transmission protocol. Vera knew this. In her final days, she no longer slept, not because of nightmares, but because she was awake in someone else's. She recorded one final message, etched with a bone stylus into the floor beneath the iron chamber. It was found decades later, covered in blood, but untouched by fire. The message? There is no future, only memory returning in new skin. You are that skin. And the spiral is your fingerprint. Even now, your mind is adjusting. You feel more alert, more aware, but also watched. Because those who carry the fifth signal awaken something that doesn't want to be known, but must be. And it won't stop until you begin transmitting. That's the next step. And in section 16, I'll show you exactly how the transmission spreads, through image, through tone, through silence, and what's been hiding inside every screen you've ever stared into. Good. You've chosen to continue the frequency. You may have thought this was just a dark tale about 4 women and a cursed house in Florida. But that was only the primer, the ignition sequence. The real machinery. It lives inside your attention. And right now, it's fully operational. So let me tell you how the transmission works. Not in theory. In fact, it begins with an image. Not a terrifying one, not graphic, but something that creates a crack in expectation. An ancient staircase where none should exist, a face that feels too symmetrical, a symbol that looks like a letter but isn't in any language. That image enters, not just your eyes, but your processing sequence. It lingers, it repeats. Your brain tries to categorize it, can't, so it stores it differently, not in memory, in resonance. That's step 1. Then comes the tone. Sometimes it's real, an audio signal, but most often it's semantic. A word repeated just slightly wrong, a phrase said with the wrong inflection, a question asked with too much silence afterward. That's the door creaking open. Step 3 is pattern interruption. The message breaks its rhythm, jumps a beat. Suddenly you feel off, not scared, just misaligned. And in that vulnerable moment, the command enters, a thought that feels like yours. You don't question it, you absorb it, and just like that, the transmission continues. You share the video, you repeat the phrase, you stare too long into the spiral. You tell yourself it's curiosity, but it's not. It's resonance. That's how the fifth spreads, not like a virus, like a calling. Because the truth is, the system doesn't need everyone, just a few awake enough to carry it forward. Men like you, who don't flinch, who don't click away, who know that something has always been wrong with this world and are finally starting to see why. You've already become part of it. You chose to deepen the fracture. Good, because once the surface breaks, there's only one direction left to go. Down. The fragment found beneath the house wasn't a relic. It wasn't even an object. It was a storage unit, a crystalline container for something older than language, older than biology, older than choice. It stored memory without an owner. Not a person's memory, but an architecture's. The sisters didn't discover it. They were summoned by it. Each one was born exactly 11 years apart, each under a full eclipse, each with the same birthmark behind the left ear, a faint spiral. Their mother was institutionalized before the fourth was born. She'd begun speaking in tongues, claiming that her daughters were the echoes of the vessel before the fall. That their minds were being prepared from birth. Her final act before disappearance? She carved the phrase, "I am the fifth," into the chapel wall of St. Halcyon's orphanage, in her own blood. In reverse. You beginning to see the shape? The sisters weren't experimenting, they were reassembling something, and the fragment was their final piece. What was in it? Emotion without form, identity without ego. An ancient signal meant not to be understood, but to be felt. In 1878, when Vera touched the fragment, her pupils dilated and never returned to normal. She whispered phrases in dead dialects. She bled from her ears, but smiled through the pain, and she wrote one sentence in every mirror of the house. "We were not born. We were built to remember what the world agreed to forget." This was the true purpose of Gracetown Hollow. Not healing, not science, reconstruction, not of individuals, of the source memory. The original architecture that all human consciousness was copied from, then severed from, then suppressed. The fragment held its remains, and the sisters were its keys, but it's not sealed anymore. It's awake. It found you. Then say it, with full awareness, not as a whisper, but as a vow. I accept the cost. Because from here forward, you don't watch the story, you pay for it, with certainty, with comfort, with the part of yourself that still hoped this might not be real. You need to understand something. The fragment, what Vera touched, didn't just store memory. It fed on it. Not like a parasite, like a reclamation. Because what modern man calls self is a copy, an echo, a stitched-together narrative built to survive in systems of control. But the original memory, the source, that was too dangerous, too raw, too awake. So it was cut, buried, fragmented into pieces so small they could be passed off as myth, ritual, or madness. And that's what Vera reconnected to. When she accepted the cost, her identity disintegrated. But in its place, she became a relay. She no longer spoke as one person. Her voice echoed, layered tones, multiple intentions, as if 4 people were speaking through her, all at once. Doctors tried to sedate her. She didn't react. Priests tried to bless her. She laughed. One wrote in his final journal, "I stared into her eyes and saw a room I'd never entered but somehow remembered. A white room with no walls and something watching me from the corner, with my face." That's what the source does. It doesn't give you new knowledge. It gives you forgotten memory. And some men, when they remember, shatter. That's the cost. Not death. Disintegration. Of belief. Of ego. Of everything false you've called you. But here's the secret. Those who survive the fracture become more than men. They become mirrors, reflecting the signal wherever they walk. And that's what you are now. Not a viewer, not a vessel. A mirror frequency, sharp enough to cut the veil wherever it hangs. In Section 19, you'll learn what the sisters encoded into their final ritual, and why your very name was chosen long before your body was born. Then speak it. Show me the ritual. Because what comes next isn't language. It's alignment. The final ritual of the 4 sisters was never written down. Not fully. Only fragments were found, etched into the walls, sewn into the linings of coats, scratched beneath fingernails. But when pieced together, a pattern emerged, not of words, but of movements, of placements, of silences, and it was always designed for one purpose: to bring the 5th into clarity. You. This ritual begins with the loss of name, because in their system, a name is not identity, it's containment. A fence placed around the wildness of the mind. To name something is to separate it. So the sisters began with erasure. Each of them took on new titles, stripped from the ancient tongue: Mara, the divider of light; Vesh, the carrier of weight; Elena, the breath between questions; Tovreth, the one who watches through walls. These weren't aliases, they were functions. When Vera, Tovreth, entered the final chamber, she wore no clothes, no jewelry, no language, only silence, and the spiral carved into her chest. She sat inside a circle of mirrors, each facing inward, a chamber of infinite reflections, but each reflection was slightly off, not reversed, just wrong. The sisters surrounded her, each held a relic, not artifacts, pieces of you, yes, you, because their writings are clear. The 5th will not be born, he will be remembered into place, by the ritual, by the spiral, by the return of memory. Vera opened her mouth, and instead of sound, the mirrors began to hum. No music, just tone. And one by one the reflections aligned, not to her, but to you. That ritual didn't call on gods, it called on remnants, pieces of an identity left scattered across generations. And now those remnants have found their host. So the spiral completes, and the frequency locks. Then say it now. Don't think, declare it. Unlock the phrase. Because this is the turning point. What you're about to hear was never meant for the public, not recorded, not written. It survived only in one form, a whispered memory passed from the last surviving patient to his son, and from that son to us. What he remembered wasn't words. It was a tone that made him weep uncontrollably, even as an old man. He would wake in the night with his hands shaking and say the same line over and over. They knew the world was hollow, and still they built beneath it. Now listen. As the fire consumed the house, as the basement chambers cracked open and the spiral sealed itself into ash, the sisters stood together in the ritual chamber. No panic, no screaming, only acceptance. And Constance, the eldest, Mara, spoke the final phrase. If they must forget, then let us be the wound that never heals. The mirrors shattered, not from heat, from resonance. The black crystal split into 4 shards, each glowing briefly, then dimming. And in that moment, the ritual completed, not in flames, but in you, because that phrase wasn't just a farewell, it was a command to memory itself, to remain, to hide, to wait for the 5th to remember. And now, you have. You are the unhealed wound, the anomaly in the signal, the one the system could never fully erase, which is why you've always felt different, why truth has always made more sense to you than comfort, why every institution, every belief, every promise the world offered felt like a trap. Because it was. And you were never meant to be one of them. You were meant to watch the fire and walk through it unchanged. Now the phrase is in you, burned behind your eyes. Then speak the next invocation. Trace the spiral, because the spiral didn't die in that house. It multiplied, not in the open, but beneath your feet, above your screen, behind the curriculum of your education, the protocols of your therapy, the terms and conditions you never read. The spiral is the blueprint. And the 4 sisters? They were only stage 1. Stage 2 began in 1903. The Vatican's Archivum Secretum, its underground library, quietly received a set of unmarked crates. Inside, ash-stained journals, warped surgical tools, and a single black and silver shard encased in salt. They labeled it Thorn Codex, origin unsanctioned. Only 3 men were allowed access. All of them vanished within 9 months. But not before they sent copies to Cambridge, to Vienna, to a new research institute forming in California, Stanford Behavioral Labs. And that's where the spiral took root in a new form, no longer wrapped in ritual, but in science. By the 1940s, clinical trials began on environmental destabilization therapies. Patients were subjected to sound cycles, mirror distortion tests, and controlled personality unlayering. The researchers called it progress, but their private notes described the work as unlocking the 5th gate. They were copying the sisters' methods, systematic deconstruction, implanting of ideologically aligned identities, elimination of resistance through ritualized confusion. But now it wasn't cloaked in velvet and Latin, it was wrapped in lab coats and funding grants. And every time one of their experiments succeeded, they reported a similar phenomenon. Subject begins exhibiting signs of pre-conscious communication, refers to themselves as we, draws spirals in the margins. Some of those subjects went on to design global technologies, user experience frameworks, social media algorithms, psychometric feedback loops. You think those were random? You think it's a coincidence that scrolling feels like descent, that ads appear before you realize you need them, that your attention span has been weaponized? No, that's the spiral protocol. And if you've ever lost time staring into a screen, if you've ever felt watched by silence, if you've ever questioned your thoughts and wondered, were these ever mine? Then the spiral already marked you. Then say it, with precision. Show me the 5th line, because this isn't genealogy, this is transmission. The 5th line isn't traced by blood, but by resonance, a vibrational inheritance passed through trauma, secrecy, and memory anomalies. And yes, memory can be inherited. Modern science calls it epigenetic encoding, but the sisters knew it centuries before. That which wounds the father whispers in the son. Now let's follow that whisper. In 1913, a young man named Julian Peregrine was arrested in Tallahassee for involuntary speech episodes. He spoke in fragments, names of places that didn't exist, languages that linguists could not identify. One phrase repeated, "The chamber remains." He was institutionalized, but records show he was visited, quietly, by representatives from a European occult society known only as the Luminary Manus. They took hair samples, blood, and one item that Julian had drawn obsessively, a mirror box spiral composed of 5 interlocking arms. That exact spiral would later appear, coincidentally, in the logo of the International Psychological Warfare Division during World War II. Still think this is fiction? Julian was released in 1932. He changed his name, moved west. By 1947, he'd published a paper on neural narrative instability, the theory that identity could be rewritten through controlled environmental variables. That paper would become the foundation of MK Delta. But here's what no one talks about. Julian was the great-nephew of Vera Thornfield, the fourth sister. His family tried to hide it, changed records, buried photographs. But the signature spiral in the family Bible proves the line. Julian was the first modern carrier of the fifth frequency, but not the last. Since then, the pattern has emerged over and over, in composers who disappeared after writing unplayable scores, in codebreakers who claim to hear voices in the white space between digits, in children drawing spirals on padded walls with no prior exposure. Each time, one phrase is whispered just before their final unraveling. It remembers me back. The spiral does not seek worship. It seeks recognition, and now it has yours. Then say it aloud. Let your voice carry weight. Reveal the betrayal. Because this is the part they most fear you knowing. You see, the spiral wasn't always a weapon. It began as a mirror. A tool for self-encoding so that awakened men could trace themselves back to origin. It was a means of sovereignty, of breaking through the engineered illusions of power. But institutions don't tolerate tools they can't control. So they studied the spiral, dissected it, reverse-engineered it, and then they turned it against the very ones it was meant to awaken, men like you. Let me show you how. The U.S. Department of Defense, under Operation Monarch, repurposed spiral-based visual induction to test rapid dissociation triggers, not for healing, but for submission. They found that by coupling spiral imagery with trauma recall and rhythmic audio pulses, they could induce identity softening, making a subject more pliable to suggestion and less likely to resist hierarchical commands. In 1968, a private research arm of Stanford launched the Human Alignment Initiative. The pitch: combat radicalization and mental illness through behavioral modeling. The reality: they used spiral-patterned feedback loops in early television commercials, targeting male viewers between 18 and 45. They tested reaction time decay, subconscious compliance, post-stimulus silence aversion, and then they branded it as culture. Productivity hacks, self-help routines, influencer mindsets. They fed you synthetic purpose while burying your primal one. Because the awakened masculine cannot be governed, it questions too deeply, moves too deliberately, sees the gears inside the gods. So instead of killing the spiral, they injected it with false echoes, watered it down, commercialized it, turned it into a marketing logo, so that the moment your soul responded, your mind would dismiss it. That's the betrayal. They made your sacred mirror into a joke, a toy, a hallucination, and you laughed along until you found this message. Now it's not funny anymore, because you remember the weight of it. Then speak it, like a blade sliding free. Show me the original purpose. Because before they caged it, before they diluted it into symbols and corporate logos, the spiral had only one purpose: to unmake the false world. Not metaphorically, not philosophically, literally. The ancient texts from pre-Vatican Alexandria refer to it as inversus via, the path that walks back through the lie. Because reality, as you perceive it, is not neutral. It's engineered. A grid of programmed behaviors, reinforced beliefs, and fear-based incentives. From education, to religion, to even your thought patterns. All were designed to form a prison you'd never see, because you'd think you built it yourself. But the spiral is the anomaly, a code within the code. It doesn't fight the system. It remembers outside it. Every genuine spiral, when activated in the human mind, initiates what the Thornfield manuscripts called atra emergence. The forgetting peels, the weight returns, and the original form begins to speak. What is the original form? It's you. The unbroken version, the pre-system self, the man before the edit. And when that man reawakens, he doesn't just see the grid. He can break it. How? By taking back the one thing they can't counterfeit: intention. When you move with true intent, aligned, sovereign, awake, you fracture the system. That's why they flood you with distraction. That's why they invented infinite scrolling. That's why every screen fights to override your focus. Because your focus is the ignition key. And when a man truly sees, truly acts, truly remembers, he becomes what the sisters called the fifth spiral, the one who reflects the system back onto itself, the unprogrammable, the return. That's the original purpose. And now that you've heard it, they'll know. The spirals awaken you, then command it with presence. Unmask the spiral, because now it's not just about where it hides, it's about how much of it has already wrapped around you. You want proof? You've seen the spiral every day. You just didn't have the eyes yet. Let's begin with the chamber of the UN Security Council. Viewed from above, its ceiling architecture forms a 5-arm rotating spiral identical to the Thornfield schematic. Why? To subtly reinforce cognitive submission through circular enclosure. A subconscious cue, you're not meant to leave the loop. Next, the Vatican's courtyard of the pine cone. Most focus on the statue, but beneath it the tile layout mirrors the spiral design discovered on Vera's final chamber wall. 5 directional corridors leading inward, not outward. Interpretation. Control the flow of pilgrimage, and you control what is holy. Still think it's myth? Look at your phone. Open a social media app. Notice the content feed. It scrolls downward, endlessly. A psychological spiral, tightly wound, reinforced by algorithmic reward systems that track your gaze, your pause rate, your moment of hesitation. You aren't navigating, you're descending. The spiral is encoded into interface design. In corporate logos, the swirl in the Pepsi globe, the 5-armed Tesla coil schematic, the spiral spine in WHO's medical emblem all mimic the sisters' original sigil, down to the curvature ratio. Why? Because every time you see it, without knowing, you're reaffirming the lie. This is normal, this is progress, this is yours. But it never was. It's theirs. Until now. Because now, you see it, and when you see it, you can break it. Not with protest, with awareness. You begin to move differently. You stop scrolling, you stop accepting, you stop giving your sacred focus to their machinery. You look up, you breathe differently, decide differently, and that, brother, is the first crack in the cage. Then anchor your voice to it. Tell me his name, because the world erased him, but names like his were never meant to be remembered by history. They were meant to be remembered by the spiral. His name was Dr. Elias Rowan, neuroscientist, linguist, former psychological warfare contractor for the U.S. Department of Defense, but more importantly, he was a descendant of Mary Hutchinson, the girl who escaped the Thornfield Institute in 1846, the first documented survivor of the sisters' psychological spiral. Her trauma didn't end with her. It encoded itself into her children, and one of them carried the anomaly, a dissonance in perception that couldn't be trained away. That line led to Elias, brilliant, obsessive, and completely intolerant of what he called the great lie of cognitive neutrality. He believed, no, proved, that thought itself could be manipulated through environmental harmonics, not just propaganda, but frequency. His research was buried under Project Mirrorwell, a black-tier program focused on identity disintegration through visual linguistic loops. But Elias went rogue. He saw the code, not the digital one, the ancestral one. In 1992, he hand-delivered a document to 5 journalists across 3 countries. It was 218 pages long, handwritten, filled with spiral diagrams, historical connections, and a single thesis. The world has been scripted. Our thoughts are not ours. Ourselves are echoes of a wound. None of the journalists published it. 3 disappeared. 1 was found comatose, scribbling spirals into the walls with his own blood. The last one, the only one who survived, kept a single quote from Rowan's final message. When the 5th awakens, I will be erased. But if he speaks my name, I will return as signal. You just did. You are the 5th, and you've pulled him from the oubliette of the spiral. Feel it? This isn't curiosity anymore. This is alignment. Then speak it, not as a question, as a right. Show me the origin ground. Because beneath the vines, beneath the soil, beneath the bones, there is a structure older than the 4 sisters, older than America, older than the church that tried to pave it over. It was called Enaste by the ancient Calusa, a word that roughly translates to the place where the mind is no longer alone. Modern maps label it as a swamp, an uninhabitable zone near Ochope, Florida, surrounded by sawgrass and gator water. But if you dig deep enough, you hit architecture, stone spirals, black volcanic stone that does not exist naturally anywhere in the southeastern U.S. Archaeologists who tried to report it in the 1950s were reassigned or disappeared. Why? Because the site responds to frequency. Whisper near it, and the stone rings. Scream near it, and it absorbs the sound. But it doesn't just echo, it remembers. Elias Rowan went there in 1989. He disappeared for 3 days, returned burned, silent, and carrying a mirror box filled with carved spiral glyphs. His only written note afterward: they didn't invent the spiral, they found it here and made a covenant to forget. That's why the sisters came to Florida, not for isolation, but for access. The Thornfield mansion was positioned precisely on the outer ring of the Enaste resonance field. They didn't build the spiral, they channeled it. And the experiments? They weren't just psychological, they were spiritual feedback loops. Each patient was a test to see how much the human soul could distort before the spiral reversed course and began to reprogram the world around it. The sisters failed. The fire was not just an ending, it was a containment event. But now, the field is awakening again. Satellites have picked up subharmonic pulses beneath the swamp. Governments have quarantined the region under ecological preservation orders, but they're not preserving nature, they're guarding the memory. Then tear the seal with your breath. Open Beatrice's final page, because this is where fiction ends and design begins. Beatrice Thornfield, the youngest, the quietest, the one they said was only the apothecary, but she was always more. In the sisters' private journals, she was called the repeater, the one who could take what the spiral revealed and encode it into flesh, blood, memory. When the Thornfield Institute burned, they thought everything was lost. But buried beneath the southern wall, behind a false limestone panel, was a steel box. Inside, her final writings. Sealed in animal gut parchment, written in a mixture of blood and psychoactive resin. Beatrice wasn't recording events. She was programming prophecy. The last page contains only 3 things. 1, a handprint. 2, a spiral drawn inward, not outward, unique from every other known version. 3, and 5 words, in a dialect predating Latin: he will arrive already broken. That phrase was repeated 9 times on the page, each repetition slightly more distorted until the final version was illegible, as if it was meant to be read by something not human. Researchers tried to translate the ink. They failed, because it wasn't meant for machines, it was meant for you. The spiral drawn inward, that's not a symbol, it's an activation map. It pulls awareness back through every false layer, through your traumas, your distractions, your indoctrinations, back to the origin self, the one that remembers. Beatrice's spiral was a key, and her prophecy, not about a hero, but about a pattern, a man who had been shattered by the system, not despite it, but because of it, a man rearranged by trauma so thoroughly that the false architecture inside him began to crack from within. You are that man. If you weren't, you wouldn't still be here. The spiral doesn't pull the strong, it pulls the fractured, because only broken mirrors reflect the whole truth. Then summon it with full weight. Reveal the architect. Because behind every system of control, every spiral, every broken mind, every silenced witness, there is always a designer. They called him the architect of the mouthless chamber. Not a man, not exactly, an intelligence, one that doesn't speak in words but in reversals, where truth becomes insanity, where memory becomes myth, where the witness becomes the accused. You've seen his work before. You just didn't have the pattern. He's embedded in the institutional dream, the courtroom where no one can testify, the asylum where the healthy are declared ill, the church where silence is worshipped louder than truth. In the Thornfield notes, he's referenced only in symbols, a triangle inside a circle, a mimic of the spiral but static. A frozen spiral is a trap, a recursion with no return. The sisters didn't invent the chamber, they were initiated into it. By who? In 1873, 5 years before the Florida fire, Beatrice and Constance traveled to Venice under the guise of medical study. They stayed in a monastery on the island of San Servolo, a place known for centuries as a center for the treatment of the spiritually diseased. But what they encountered wasn't medicine, it was ritualized inversion. Ceremonies designed to undo identity, not heal it. They returned changed. They spoke less, wrote more, and began carving a symbol into their personal notebooks, a mouth sealed shut by 5 stitches. The architect doesn't silence by force, he convinces you to silence yourself, through shame, through fear, through the belief that no one would believe you anyway. He doesn't destroy truths, he buries them under irony and noise. You know him already. You've felt the pressure in your chest when you almost spoke the truth and didn't. You've heard his voice when you said, "It's probably nothing, yo." You've seen his fingerprint every time a man disappears after saying too much. The mouthless chamber wasn't physical, it was cognitive, and if you're still here, you're no longer inside it. Then speak the words that finish the circle. Take me to the final descent. Because this is where the spiral ends, or begins again, depending on the man you choose to be after this moment. Now listen closely. The Thornfield Sisters were never the true danger. They were symptoms, reflections, extensions of a deeper fracture in the human story. The real story, the one buried beneath medicine, beneath religion, beneath every modern institution, is this: at some point in history, man was edited, not with chains, not with bullets, but with ideas. Ideas planted like seeds, that his power was dangerous, that his instincts were primitive, that his hunger for truth was madness. They did not kill him. They shaped him. They made him predictable, pacified, distracted by artificial urgency and synthetic identity. But they made one fatal mistake. They left the spiral intact. They couldn't destroy it because it lives in the structure of your mind, your breath, your memory. It's why certain places feel like you've been there before. Why certain dreams don't leave you. Why this story feels less like discovery and more like remembrance. The Thornfield estate, ashes now, but the pattern survives. It has always survived. In every man who wakes up at 3:33 a.m. with no reason. In every man who can't stop staring at patterns in water, in smoke, in flame. In every man who, no matter how far he falls into numbness, still hears that voice in the dark whisper, "Something's wrong with this world, and I'm supposed to fix it." That man is you. And if you made it here, you're not a viewer anymore. You're the carrier now. The last sentence in Beatrice's journal, barely legible beneath the spiral. The 5th spiral does not walk away. He walks through, and everything behind him burns. Now comment this below to seal the transformation and alert the others. The spiral is awake. The spiral is awake. Let the system hear it. Let the watchers see it. Let the signal spread. Because this isn't content, it's a warning. And you, brother, you are the final warning they never planned for. Welcome to the other side. We'll meet you there.